Hello, dear gardeners and growing enthusiasts. We all know the fundamental truth: water is life. And naturally, we want to give our tender seedlings the very best, nurturing them with care and attention. But what if I told you that this very care, this regular, loving watering, might actually be the #1 cause of young plant death? Sounds paradoxical, right? Today, we are going to break down the most common, insidious, and destructive mistake that 90% of home growers make. We're going to discuss when it is absolutely critical not to water your seedlings. I promise after this video, you will look at your watering can completely differently and save your future harvest from this invisible threat. Before we dive into the specific scenarios, let's take a moment to understand what a seedling really is. It's not just a tiny plant. It's a genuine infant in the botanical world. It has a miniature, incredibly delicate root system. These hair-thin, web-like roots are its sole means of drawing nutrition and, crucially, breathing. They are extremely vulnerable. Any stress, be it a temperature fluctuation, a drought, or incorrect watering, can quickly become fatal. The primary enemies of our seedlings, directly linked to excess moisture, are root rot and the notorious disease known as damping off. These are fungal diseases that thrive in saturated, poorly aerated soil. They literally suffocate the roots, preventing them from breathing or feeding, and the plant quickly collapses. Our main goal is to avoid creating a 5-star resort environment for these deadly diseases. So, here is the first and perhaps most critical mistake. Never water your seedlings immediately after transplanting them. Just try to imagine the level of stress this puts on the plant. It's been gently, yet inevitably, pulled out of its familiar environment, suffering minor root trauma. Every severed root tip is essentially an open wound, and in this vulnerable state, we, with the best of intentions, pour water right over them. What happens then? The water floods those tiny wounds, preventing them from healing, and creates the perfect moist pathway for soil-borne fungal pathogens to enter. Instead of setting new roots, the plant simply starts to rot. We are not helping the plant. We are inflicting torture. So, what's the right approach? After transplanting, you must give your seedlings time. Move them to a dim or shady spot and just leave them completely alone for at least 2 or 3 days. This allows the wounds on the roots to dry out slightly and begin to callus over. The potting mix you used for the transplant should already be moderately moist. That will provide enough hydration for the initial recovery phase. You should only consider the first post-transplant watering after 3 or preferably 5 days, once the plant shows visible signs of recovery. The second common mistake is watering your seedlings at night. You might wonder, what difference does it make? The difference is huge. Let's briefly recall some basic high school biology. At night, without sunlight, the process of photosynthesis completely halts. Transpiration, that's the evaporation of moisture through the leaves, slows down almost to zero. Essentially, the plant goes to sleep and barely consumes any water. So, what happens to all that moisture you generously poured into the pot in the evening? It stays right there. The soil remains soaking wet and cold throughout the entire night. This is the perfect incubator for fungal infections, specifically the dreaded condition known as damping off. High humidity combined with cooler nighttime temperatures is a direct fast track to plant disease. Visualize this scenario. You leave a damp towel in a cool, unventilated bathroom. By morning, it's going to smell foul and become a breeding ground for mildew and bacteria. The exact same thing is happening in your seedling container. Remember the golden rule: always water and mist your seedlings only during the first half of the day, ideally right in the morning. This gives the excess moisture time to evaporate throughout the day, while the plant uses exactly what it needs before nightfall. Rule number 3: never, ever water your seedlings with cold water straight from the tap. For the delicate, sensitive roots of a young plant, this is like giving a person an ice bath. That sudden temperature drop causes a significant shock to the entire root system. The tiny feeder hairs responsible for absorbing nutrients can simply die off under this kind of stress. When this happens, the plant can't feed properly, its growth stalls, and it becomes weak and highly vulnerable to disease. Furthermore, cold water is far less effective at dissolving the nutrients already present in the soil, effectively locking them away from the plant. Think about trying to dissolve sugar in ice water. It's an incredibly slow process. Your roots face the exact same struggle to absorb necessary food. So, what kind of water is ideal? It should be aged, either room temperature or even slightly warmer, ideally between 72 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit, or 22 to 25 degrees Celsius. Always fill your watering can hours in advance and let it sit at room temperature. This allows the water to warm up properly and ensures that any harsh chlorine has time to dissipate. This small act of care will pay off handsomely with healthy, robust seedlings. Here is the fourth point, and perhaps the most obvious one, yet it's where many gardeners fail. Don't water your seedlings if the soil in the pot is already moist. This is the main reason for overwatering. We often water out of habit or strictly following a schedule, thinking, "Oh, look, it's Wednesday, time to water." But plants don't use calendars. Their need for moisture depends on countless factors: air temperature and humidity, light intensity, the size of the plant itself, and the volume of the container. On a cool, overcast day, your seedlings will drink far less water than they would on a sunny and hot day. So, ditch the watering schedule. Before you reach for the watering can, perform a simple yet foolproof test. Stick your finger into the soil about half an inch deep. If you feel moisture, it is still too early to water. The soil needs to dry out slightly. Another excellent method is to simply lift the pot. If it feels feather light, it's definitely time to water. If it's heavy or substantial, it still has enough moisture. Learn to feel your plants, rather than blindly following instructions. Let's talk about what's going on outside. Our fifth key rule is to avoid heavy watering, especially during extended periods of cloudy or dreary weather. While this rule is similar to avoiding nighttime watering, it has its own unique implications. When the sun is hidden behind thick clouds for several days straight, the plant's metabolic processes naturally slow down. Moisture evaporation from the soil and leaves is minimal, and indoor humidity typically rises. Under these conditions, even a typical morning watering routine can be excessive. The water will stagnate in the root zone, displacing the vital oxygen needed for root respiration. In essence, the roots start to suffocate. Imagine a swamp. That's exactly what you risk turning your seedling pot into. During overcast days, you must drastically minimize watering. Only water when the top layer of soil has completely dried out, and use a much smaller volume than you normally would. It is always better to slightly underwater than to overwater. Slight wilting due to lack of moisture is easily fixed with a single watering. However, saving a plant from root rot is much harder and sometimes impossible. The sixth important tip is about getting your seedlings ready for their big move. Don't water the plants heavily the day before, or especially not right before, transplanting them into the garden or greenhouse. Many gardeners assume they need to soak the seedlings thoroughly before this stressful event, but this is completely counterproductive. A heavily oversaturated root ball becomes dense, mushy, and extremely fragile. When you try to lift it out of the container, there's a high chance it will crumble, exposing and damaging those delicate feeder roots. This adds significant, unnecessary stress to the plant, which will dramatically slow down its establishment in the new location. So, what's the right approach? The optimal timing is to water your seedlings 2 to 3 days before you plan to transplant them. By the time of the move, the root ball will be perfectly moist, light, and compact. It will hold its shape firmly, without crumbling when handled. This ensures you can transplant the seedling with minimal root disturbance, the secret to quick adaptation and a strong start in its new home. So, give your seedlings a chance to firm up before their big trip. Point number 7 is a red flag you absolutely cannot ignore. Never water your seedlings if you notice the first signs of black leg. What exactly is it? It's when the stem darkens and thins right at the soil line. The stem looks almost pinched, as if tied off with a thread, and eventually the plant just collapses and dies. This is a fungal disease that absolutely thrives on dampness. If you see these symptoms and instinctively reach for the watering can, you are making a fatal mistake. You are literally pouring gasoline on the fire, creating even more favourable conditions for the fungus and speeding up its spread to neighbouring plants. So what should you do in this situation? Stop watering immediately. Carefully remove the infected plant, including the surrounding root ball. The remaining healthy seedlings must be treated with a fungicide right away. You can also sprinkle dry sand or ash around the base of the healthy plants to dry out the top layer of soil and create a physical barrier against the fungus. Only after you are absolutely sure the disease has been halted can you resume watering, and even then it must be done very carefully and sparingly. The eighth mistake we need to address is overhead watering, specifically getting water directly on the leaves. This is especially risky when you're growing seedlings indoors, particularly in an apartment setting. Many people, especially novice gardeners, use a watering can with a fine rose head to water their seedlings, trying to mimic a gentle rain. While this looks appealing, it carries a significant hidden threat. Water droplets left on those delicate leaves, combined with typical indoor air, which is often still or stagnant, evaporate very slowly. This lingering dampness on the leaf surface creates the perfect breeding ground for a nasty fungal disease, powdery mildew. Furthermore, when sunlight hits those water droplets, they can act like tiny magnifying lenses, causing the leaves to suffer from severe sun scorch or burn. Imagine stepping out onto the beach and not drying off after swimming. You'll scorch almost instantly. The correct way to water seedlings is always directly at the base. Use a watering can with a long, narrow spout, or even a simple bulb syringe. Direct the stream of water carefully onto the soil, making sure to avoid hitting the stem and the leaves. This isn't just safer, it's also far more effective because the water is delivered exactly where it's needed, right to the roots. Tip number 9 is all about feeding your seedlings. Never water your seedlings right after you've applied dry or granular fertilizer. I know some gardeners like to sprinkle granules on the soil surface and then immediately soak the soil, thinking this dissolves the nutrients instantly. But don't do this. This is a seriously risky method. When you drench those granules, the concentration of salt surrounding them spikes dangerously high within the first few minutes. For fragile seedling roots, this is essentially a chemical burn. The delicate root hairs are instantly fried, and the plant doesn't just miss out on nutrients, it loses the ability to absorb even plain water. The result? Your seedling will wilt and potentially die. So, how do we fertilize safely? For young seedlings, liquid fertilizers are always the superior choice. Mix the fertilizer according to the instructions, but here is a crucial tip for young plants. Dilute the mix to half the recommended strength. And remember this vital rule: whether you are using liquid or dry fertilizer, always apply it to pre-moistened soil. First, water your seedlings lightly with plain water. Then, wait an hour or two before coming back and applying the fertilizer solution. This simple step is what protects the roots from fertilizer burn. Rule number 10 is simple. Don't water your seedlings if there is still water standing in the tray or saucer beneath the pot. This is the clearest and most definitive sign that you have already overwatered. If you leave excess water sitting in the saucer after irrigation, the roots are essentially sitting in a bog. Oxygen access is completely cut off. They will start to suffocate and quickly develop root rot. Paradoxically, a plant cannot absorb water when its roots are constantly submerged. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Imagine trying to drink while holding your breath indefinitely. You won't survive for long. That's why, after watering, you must wait about 30 to 40 minutes. This gives all the excess moisture time to drain into the tray. You must drain this water immediately. Never leave your pots standing in a puddle. Having proper drainage holes in your seedling containers isn't just a suggestion, it's the golden rule. A dry, empty saucer is the sign of a successful gardener. It means you are doing everything right and actively protecting the health of your little one's root systems. Let's talk about point number 11, a classic rookie mistake and one that demands your full attention. If your seedlings look droopy or wilted, but the soil in the pot is already wet or damp, do not rush to water them. Every gardener's instinct screams, "Oh no, it's wilting! It needs water! Quick, water it!" But in this specific situation, that instinct is actually deadly. Wilting leaves combined with wet soil is not a sign of thirst. It's a distress signal from suffocating, rotting roots. The roots are already so damaged from overwatering that they can no longer transport moisture to the leaves, even when surrounded by wet soil. If you add more water now, you will absolutely finish off the plant. So what should you do? Gently slide the plant out of its container and inspect the roots. If they look dark, slimy, or smell foul, you are definitely dealing with root rot. You need to trim away the damaged portions, dust the healthy roots with activated charcoal or powdered fungicide, and repot the seedling into fresh, dry potting mix. And obviously, stop watering immediately. Remember this mantra: droopy leaves plus wet soil equals stop watering. The 12th situation where you should put the watering can away is if your seedlings are sitting on a cold windowsill or are exposed to a draft. We've already discussed the damage cold water can cause, but cold soil is just as problematic, if not more so. Even if you water using warm water, if the pot is resting on an icy, stone windowsill, the soil will cool down very quickly. When the soil is cold and wet, the roots practically shut down. They stop absorbing water and nutrients effectively. The stagnant moisture then creates those familiar, ideal conditions for fungal diseases. If you add a draft to the mix, which further cools the container and the plant itself, your seedlings are hit with a double whammy. Imagine stepping out into freezing weather with wet feet. You'd catch a cold immediately. It's the exact same principle for your young plants. This is why, before you reach for the watering can, you must ensure your plants are warm and cozy. Place a sheet of styrofoam or several layers of thick cardboard underneath your seedling trays to insulate them from the cold windowsill. Also, make absolutely sure that you don't have drafts blowing in from the window frame. Create comfortable conditions for your plants first, and only then should you consider watering. The 13th tip is all about those super tiny, freshly germinated seedlings. When you water them, never use a heavy stream from a regular watering can. It might seem like a small detail, but for these minuscule, barely rooted sprouts, it can be catastrophic. A strong blast of water will erode the soil around the fragile stem, potentially exposing and damaging the tiny roots, or even flatten and snap the delicate seedling completely. This is especially risky for small seeded crops like petunias or lobelia, whose initial sprouts look like thin green threads. Watering these little guys requires the gentlest methods available. A fine mist spray bottle is perfect. Use it to carefully dampen the soil surface around the seedlings. You could also use a bulb syringe or a large syringe without the needle to deliver very controlled, measured amounts of water precisely to the root zone. Another excellent technique is bottom watering. Just pour water into the drainage saucer or tray, and the soil will wick up exactly the moisture it needs through the drainage holes. This is arguably the safest and most effective method for watering your smallest starts. The 14th tip focuses on lighting. Don't overwater your seedlings, especially if they are suffering from a severe lack of light. This often happens if they are sitting deep within a room, placed on a north-facing windowsill, or simply lack supplemental lighting. When light is scarce, just like at night, photosynthesis slows down dramatically. The plant barely grows, and consequently, it consumes very little water. If you water those seedlings the same way you water the ones sitting on a sunny south-facing window under a dedicated grow light, you are guaranteed to drown them. Excess moisture is particularly dangerous when plants are light-starved. It doesn't just encourage root rot, it actively contributes to etiolation, or stretching of the seedlings. The plant becomes leggy, pale and weak. Therefore, remember this direct correlation. Less light means less watering. Before you reach for the watering can for those struggling, stretched-out plants, focus first on increasing their light exposure. Often, simply setting up even the most basic grow light can solve the problems of both stretching and the risk of overwatering. Our 15th piece of advice is aimed at those who love using DIY containers for their seedlings. Things like old yogurt cups, trimmed plastic bottles, and so forth. It's a fantastic way to save money, but there's one critical catch. Never, under any circumstances, water seedlings in containers that lack drainage holes. It is a death sentence for your plants. Where does that excess water go? It has absolutely nowhere to escape. It pools at the bottom, completely pushing out the oxygen the roots need. As a result, those roots will rot extremely fast. Even if you try to water sparingly and carefully, eventually you will misjudge the amount, and that single mistake could be fatal. So, if you are relying on those DIY containers, do yourself a favour and don't skip this crucial step. Grab a hot nail, an awl or a drill, and make at least 3 or 4 drainage holes in the bottom of every single cup. This simple action is your best defence against overwatering and the key to healthy, vigorous seedlings. Trying to grow anything without proper drainage is simply playing Russian roulette, and the odds are stacked heavily against you. This 16th tip is often overlooked, but it is vital. Do not water your seedlings immediately after bringing them inside from a cold environment to a warm one. For instance, maybe you just bought starts at the market and brought them home. Or perhaps you moved your trays from a cool garage or porch into a heated room. The plant needs time to acclimate to this sudden temperature shift. Its root system is still cold and not yet ready to actively take up water. If you immediately water the plant, even with warm water, it creates a massive thermal conflict between the cold root ball and the warmer foliage. This sudden shock is stress that can seriously weaken the plant. Allow the seedlings to acclimate gradually. Let them sit in the new environment for at least a few hours, or ideally, half a day. This allows the temperature of the entire root ball to equalize with the surrounding room temperature. Only then should you water them, using the warm, settled water we discussed earlier. This gradual transition minimizes shock, helping the plant avoid unnecessary stress and encouraging faster, healthier growth in its new home. Situation 17. You might notice a white fuzzy residue, or perhaps a thin green film, appearing on the soil surface of your potted plants. This is usually mold or algae. Their presence is a clear indicator of 2 main problems: chronically waterlogged topsoil and poor air circulation. If you see this and continue watering as usual, the problem will only get worse. Mold and algae create a dense, impenetrable crust on the soil surface, blocking essential airflow to the roots. So, what should you do? First and foremost, stop watering immediately and allow the top layer of soil to dry out completely. Carefully scoop away the top layer of affected soil. Then, you need to gently loosen or aerate the remaining surface using a toothpick or a skewer to improve gas exchange. You can also top dress the soil with a thin layer of sterilised sand or perlite. Finally, you must reassess your watering schedule. Water less frequently, but thoroughly, ensuring the entire root ball is soaked. Crucially, make sure you provide proper ventilation in the room so the air doesn't become stagnant. Rule number 18 is this: never water, just in case, or for prevention. This is a classic psychological trap. We think, a little water couldn't hurt, or worse won't happen if I just give it a small drink. We walk past our seedling trays, the soil looks a touch dry, and our hand instinctively reaches for the watering can just to freshen things up. But as we've already established, a slight deficit of moisture is far less damaging to your seedlings than an excess. A plant that periodically experiences mild water stress develops a much stronger, deeper root system because the roots are forced to search actively for that moisture. Conversely, a constantly overwatered plant becomes a spoiled weakling with a flimsy, shallow root structure. It becomes completely dependent on those regular water handouts and is extremely vulnerable. So, fight the urge to water a small amount every single day. It's better to water less frequently, but thoroughly, ensuring the entire soil mass is soaked, and then allow the medium to dry out significantly before you water again. Ditch the meaningless, preventive watering in favour of a mindful, deliberate approach. The 19th situation where you need to pause watering is after the plant has undergone mechanical stress. For example, maybe you accidentally dropped the pot, or a curious pet knocked it over. Even if the plant looks fine at first glance, it almost certainly has minor damage to its roots or stem. At this point, the plant needs to direct all its energy toward recovery, not toward processing a new batch of water. Watering in this state will only add another layer of stress. If the soil spilled out, carefully place the plant back in the pot. Top it up with fresh soil, but do not water it immediately. Allow it at least a full day to settle down. Place the plant in a shaded area. You can also spray the leaves with an anti-stress agent, such as a peen or a similar plant stimulant. Then, on the following day, if the plant looks healthy and perked up, you can carefully give it a light watering. Remember that after any major shock, a plant, just like a person, needs rest, not a sudden heavy dose of food and drink. And now, the 20th and final tip. Do not water your seedlings right before you leave for a few days. A lot of gardeners try to stock up the plants on water before they leave, soaking them thoroughly, sometimes literally overflowing the pots, in the hope that the moisture will last. This is a major error. During the first few days you are gone, your seedlings will essentially be sitting in standing water, which, as we know, is disastrous for root health. And then, ironically, that saturated soil will rapidly dry out and turn into a hard, cracked, impenetrable clod. It is much more effective and safer to set up a controlled watering system, like a drip feeder or a wick system. The simplest method is bottom watering. Place the pots, ensuring they have drainage holes, into a wide tray containing water, perhaps lined with a capillary mat or thick fabric. Alternatively, you can easily construct a simple wick system using a water-filled plastic bottle and a piece of cotton rope or twine. One end of the wick goes into the water and the other is inserted into the soil. These setups deliver moisture constantly and precisely, preventing both oversaturation and severe dehydration. This is a far smarter and more responsible approach than just trying to water ahead of time. So, let's wrap this up. We've covered 20 situations where it's best to put the watering can down, but here is the most crucial, most striking takeaway. Wilting leaves are not always a sign of thirst. Often, they are a symptom of drowning. The plant wilts because its roots have rotted away in the excess water and can no longer function, and if you water it at that moment, you're basically delivering the final blow. Quite the twist, isn't it? The real secret to proper watering isn't about following a schedule or measuring volume. It's all about observation. Stop watering by the calendar and start listening to your plants. Feel the soil, lift the pots, look at the weather outside, and check the condition of the seedlings themselves. Remember, most issues with young plants don't come from neglect, but from too much attention. More plants die from kindness and overwatering than from drought. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end of this video. I truly hope these tips help you grow strong, healthy seedlings. If you learned something new, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Now, I have a question for you. What watering mistake was your biggest revelation? Or perhaps you have your own tried and true secret. Share your experience in the comments below, and let's keep learning from each other.